Hey, how is it going? Chris here from 99scloud.com. In this video, I'll be showing you how you can create a REST API using the AWS Web Console. We'll be using DynamoDB, Lambda, and API Gateway to achieve that. So if you are interested, stay tuned. Hey and welcome back. If you like written tutorials, please check out my website 99scloud.com. The link is in the comment section below this video. And if the content is valuable to you, please give it a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. So let's get started. Let's have a look at the agenda. First, we will look at the architecture so that we know what we are building. Then we will set up a DynamoDB table. Once we have that, we will create an IAM role so that our Lambda functions can access DynamoDB. Once this is done, we will create a Lambda function that can write data to DynamoDB. And then we will also create a Lambda function that will read data from DynamoDB. And last but not least, we will set up the API gateway so that we can access our REST API from the internet. There are some prerequisites. I'm using Postman, which is a tool to test REST APIs. It is free, so you can download it from postman.com. Or you can use any other tool you are more familiar with. So let's take a look at the architecture. What we will build is the following down here. So we will create the DynamoDB table, then we will create the Lambda functions, and then we will set up the API gateway, which will trigger those Lambda functions. And we will test everything with Postman to see if we can reach the REST API from our client, which is connected to the internet. So let's get started with the setup. Okay, so first we want to log into the AWS Web Console. So we can just go on to aws.amazon.com. And then we can click on to sign into the console. So I've done that already. So once you click on the sign in button, then you will get into the console home of AWS. So our first task here is to create our table. So we will just click on the search field up here and type DynamoDB. This will bring us to the DynamoDB section. Then we can click on the tables link. This will show us all the tables that we have set up, but we want to create a new one. So we can click on the create table button. And then we will have to give the table a name. So in our case, we will say this table is called notes. And it will have a partition key called PK. You could also give it ID as a name, as our partition key will also be the primary key. In this case, we won't specify any sort key for this example. And then you can just scroll down and click the Create Table button. Now, you may have noticed that we didn't specify any attributes. And this is because DynamoDB has a schemaless design, which means that each item could have different kind of attributes. And because of this, we specify the attributes once we create the record, and we don't have to specify them up front. So as you can see, our notes table has been created. It's now active, so we can click on it. And then we can click on to explore table items. So we don't have any items yet. As you can see, items returned 0. So let's create a new item. So for the PK, we can just give some kind of an ID. I just put 1, 2, 3, 4 as the ID, and then up here we can specify the attributes. I will specify one string attribute, which will be called note, and this will have the text, this is my first note. So once you have done that, you can create the item. And as you can see down here, we have now one item returned, which has the PK 1, 2, 3, 4, and the note, this is my first note. And this is it. So you have already set up a DynamoDB table and added an entry into it. Okay, then we can click on the AWS console home link up here to go back to the AWS console. And with this, we have completed our first task. Our next task is to create an IAM role with which the Lambda function can access DynamoDB. In order to do that, we will use a service called AIM. So we will just click onto the search field again and enter IAM. And then click on AIM. And this will bring us to the AIM page. Now, in our case, as we want to give a service access to another service, we will create a role. If we would want a user to access a service, then we would create the user. But in our case, we want simply that one service can access another service, and this will be done through roles. So we can click onto roles, and here we can click onto create role. Now here we will have different kind of options. What we want to have is the first one, so AWS service. Allow AWS services like EC2, Lambda or others to perform actions in this account. So that's what we will use. And then down here in the use case, we will have to specify Lambda. And that's it. Then we can click on the next button. And we will need to define permissions, which are also called policies. So here we can search for DynamoDB. And then what we can do is we can just take this Amazon DynamoDB full access policy. Now you could be more specific and drill down into the details and just give the specific rights that you need. But in this example, we will not do that. We will just specify the Amazon DynamoDB full access policy. Then we can click next. Then we can give it the name. So we can say note DynamoDB role, and then we can give a description. This role is required to give our Lambda function access rights to DynamoDB, and here we can basically say nodes Lambda DynamoDB role. Then we can leave the rest as is and then click on to create role. And with this, we should have created the role. So if we search for it, how did I call it? I think nodes something. Here we have it, nodes Lambda DynamoDB role. And with this, we have created this role. So we can click back onto the AWS overview page. Okay, so now that we have created the DynamoDB table and we have created a role with which we can connect to the DynamoDB table through Lambda, we can create our Lambda function. So in order to do that, we just will click up into the search bar again and type Lambda. This will bring us onto the Lambda page, and here we can click on to create function. We will say author from scratch, that's okay. Then we can just call this add note. Then here on the runtime, I will choose Node.js 14, but there are different runtimes, so basically programming languages that you can use. If you want to use another programming language, then feel free to do so, but I will be showing this example with Node.js 14. And for architecture, we can keep it as x86, 64-bit. And under permissions, you see change default execution role. So you can just open this up. Now, if you would not specify anything here, then it will create a new role automatically for you with basic Lambda permissions. But basic Lambda permissions will only allow to execute the Lambda function. It will not allow you to actually write something into DynamoDB or read from DynamoDB. And this is exactly why we have created this role before. So in our case, we can click on to use an existing role. And if we now open up this pull down here, we can just search for node. And then we will get our nodes Lambda DynamoDB role, which we have created earlier. So we can click on this and that's it. So then we can say create function. Okay, and with this, our function has been created. Now, up here, you will see a button add trigger. So add trigger basically means how can you trigger this Lambda function. So if you click onto here and then look at what can trigger your Lambda function, we will be using the API gateway, but there are a lot of different other AWS services with which you could trigger your Lambda function. So for example, if you upload a file into an S3 bucket, then you could pass the data and the file size and so on into a Lambda function and then write this data into DynamoDB, for example. So with these triggers, you would have this functionality, but in our case, we will use API gateway. But we will not do this yet. We will do this a little bit later. So we can just cancel here. And then if you scroll further down, then you can see the code. So we have a code editor, which is provided by AWS. And there are some links up here or tabs where you can do different kind of stuff. So here we have the code screen. So here we can code our Lambda function. Then we have a test screen where we can test our Lambda function to see if it is working. Monitoring, I've never tried. Then we have configuration, which if we would want to change the permissions, we could do it here. So here we can see which permissions that we actually have in place. So we have this nodes Lambda DynamoDB role. We have also other things like concurrency, where we can define that a Lambda function should always be running so that it doesn't have to be created on the first call. So you have different kind of things that you can do inside here, but we will only look at the basics in this tutorial. So I'll not cover any of this. We will just look at the code and at the test tab. So let's go to the code tab again. And let's actually run a test to see if this default code, which is provided by Lambda, is actually working. So what does this code do? It basically just returns JSON response that says status code 200. and with a body that says hello from Lambda. So if I go onto the test tab, then I can create a new test event. I will just call this test event. Template, I will just keep this as is. And here I will just remove all these parameters. So here you could basically define what values that you would like to pass into your Lambda function. But at the moment, we don't want to pass anything into our Lambda function. We just want to see if there is output from the Lambda function. So we will just leave empty brackets here. If you remove the empty brackets, you will get an error. So just make sure you have those in there. And we will not save this, we will just click the test button. Okay, so now up here you can see the result screen. So you can see, okay, it succeeded. So the result screen is green. If there would be an error, it would be red. And then if you open these details here, then you can see that this was what was returned from the function. And then down here, you can see some additional information, such as the duration for running the script, so the Lambda function, and for how much it was actually built. But you don't need to worry about this because a certain amount of requests are free, and only then you will need to start to pay. So you shouldn't get any bills from AWS. Okay, so now that we know how we can test our Lambda function, let's go back to the code. And then what we can do is add our code into here. So I have prepared this code already. So let me just copy and paste this over. And then I will run through with you what is actually happening. Okay, so in this first line, what we will do is we will load the AWS SDK. So the AWS SDK is a code library that contains the functions to access DynamoDB and add stuff into DynamoDB or read stuff from DynamoDB and so on. But the AWS SDK has basically code for all the functions which are available in AWS for all the services. So you will also have functions in there to upload files to S3, for example, and so on. And then what we will do, we will create this Dynamo client, which will hold all the functionality we need to interact with DynamoDB. Here we specify also the data center in which we are. So if we up here click on this button, then we will see in which data center that we are. It will be highlighted up here. I am in US East 1, so I'm using that data center. But if you would use another data center, then you can see here. And then you would just have to change the region in here. So then we have this exports handler, which will execute this async function, where we pass an event, a context, and a callback. So these are basically the three variables that we can pass into the Lambda function. We will be mainly working with the event one, but you can have a look what these other two do as well. I will not explain it in this tutorial. So when we connect to our REST API, we want to pass a new node. And that's what we do here. So we pass a new node, and this node, so the value of this node will be passed through event.body. And then I will create these parameters. So the first one is the table name. So we need to specify into which table the node is being added. We have created the nodes table previously in DynamoDB. And then we will create the item that should be added to DynamoDB. So here you can see the PK, so that's the unique identifier. And what we are doing here is we will create a UUID as identifier, so basically a unique key. And then we will pass our node, which we got up here as the node. And then down here, what we do is we execute the Dynamo client that we have specified up here. We will execute the put function and pass this params variable that we've defined up here. And then just return a status code of 201 with an empty body. When there is an error, then the Lambda function will automatically create an error for you and pass it back instead of this callback here. So we don't necessarily need to pass back custom errors because Lambda is clever enough to do that for us. So now that we have defined this function, we can click on the deploy button to deploy the function. And that's important because without this, it won't be deployed so that we can execute it. So we will still be executing the code that was there before. So now that we have done that, we can click onto test again. And here we can specify an event name again, which is test event. We can keep this template, but then here we will want to pass the node with a text. So here we can say body, and then in this body we can say node is, and then as node we can just say this is a node that has been created over the Lambda function. Okay, so we have created this, and then we can, so why did I specify this body tag here? If we actually execute the request over the API gateway, and we use the API gateway proxy mode, which we will, then the data will be put into this body tag. So if we don't specify this body tag, basically what will happen is that the request fails. But we will look at that later, so don't worry too much now. So once we have done that, we can click onto test. And we got an execution result succeeded, and down here we can see that we got back the status code 201 and an empty body. So this has worked. Okay, so let's see if we actually have an item in our DynamoDB table. So we can just click up into the search field again and type in DynamoDB. Click on it, click onto tables, then go down to the nodes table and click explore table items. And we can see that this item has been created. So let's create another item. So let's go back to Lambda. Then we can click onto our add node function. We can go to test. We can create a new event, test event. Then we can type body, and then we can add the node. This is a second node from Lambda. Then we can execute it again. It will still be green, everything will be fine. We can go back to DynamoDB. And onto tables, onto the nodes table, explore items, and we can see that this second entry has also been created. Okay, so that means our add nodes function is working. So let's go back to Lambda. Good, so let's now create the fetch nodes function so that we can see the nodes that we have added. So we will go on to create function again. Then we will write fetch nodes as the name. We will keep the runtime as Node.js14, x86 is okay. Here under permissions, we will choose our existing role again, which is nodes Lambda DynamoDB role, and create the function. Okay, the function has been created. So the same again, Lambda will give some default code. So I will just copy and paste over the code to actually get all the entries from DynamoDB. So again, we define this AWS SDK. Again, we will create this Dynamo client variable. Again, we will define the exports handler async with all the 3 variables. And then we will create also the params variable again. But this time we don't have any item inside. We only have the table name inside from where we want to get our nodes. So again, we will define this DynamoDB client, just that we use the scan function and not the put function as we did before. We pass the params again, and then we'll take our nodes and we will list them in the body. And if there is an error, we will just log the error to the console again. Okay, so now that we have done that, we can click onto test up here. Oh, sorry, first we will need to deploy, very important. We will need to deploy first before we actually test. So once this is deployed, we can click onto tests. We can give it a name again, test event. And here we don't need to specify anything because we just want to get back all the nodes. And then we can click onto test. And we get the execution result in green again. And when we open up, you see that we have the status code 200 passed back. And in the body, we have both the nodes that we have actually added to DynamoDB. And that's it. So we have listed all the nodes. So once we have done that, we can click onto AWS again to go back as we have completed the Lambda functions. So we have now created the DynamoDB table. We have created a role which can be used by our Lambda functions to connect to DynamoDB. We have created a Lambda function to write data to DynamoDB, and we have created a function to read all the records out of DynamoDB to display them. But how can we now access the Lambda functions over the internet when we have some kind of a client and we want to access the Lambda functions over this client? And this is where the API gateway comes in. So the API gateway is the gatekeeper between the internet and your Lambda functions. So that's what we will set up next. Okay, so you know the drill. Let's click onto the search function and then we can enter API gateway and then click on it. And here we get to the APIs, so we can click on Create API. And here we can scroll down to the REST API, and then we can click on to Build. Okay, so here we will create the REST API, we will create a new API, and the API name will be Nodes API. This will basically be an API that is responsible for all the Nodes endpoints. Then we could give a description, and then we can specify an endpoint type. I will keep it as regional. There is also edge optimized, which I think is when you want to use multi-regions. But for now, we will just keep it as regional. And then we can click on to create API. Okay, so here we are on the API screen. Here under actions, we can now create resources and we can create methods. We will just click on this create resource button. And here we can define a resource name, and I will just put nodes into here and then click on to create resource. And here we can now create methods. So I will create a method called post. Let's click OK. So when I now go onto this nodes URL with a HTTP post request, then I want to execute the add node Lambda function. So we can say Lambda function, that's good. Then here we will use Lambda proxy integration. You can read here what it is. The requests will be proxied to Lambda with request details available in the event variable, which we already looked at, of our handler function. So basically it means that every request that reaches the API gateway will be passed through directly to the Lambda function. And you will do validation of the parameters that you have passed directly in the Lambda function. The API gateway has the possibility to validate requests before it actually passes the requests along to the Lambda function. But this is quite complicated and tedious to set up. So in most cases, I would say most likely the proxy integration is a good way to go. It might be a little bit cheaper if you validate the request before it actually reaches the Lambda function, because for each Lambda function request, you will have to pay a little bit. But the costs are pretty low, and so I don't know if it makes sense to validate the request before that. But if you would have that need, or if you need to throttle certain requests or things like that, then you might want to look at the API gateway in a little bit more detail to figure out if that actually helps you. And then down here we can specify the Lambda function, so we can just type in add node, and you will see that it appears here, and then we can click save. Okay. Good. And this has now created our Lambda function. So you can see what's happening here. I will not go into all of this and what it is. Here you could also specify authentication. So AWS gives you different authentication options that you can use, like AIM and Cognito. But we will not cover this in this video. This will be one of the next videos. So here we also have a test option. So if we click onto here, then a screen will open where we can test if we can reach our Lambda function again. So what we can do here is we can specify a node again. Node, double point, and then this is a node from passed through the API gateway. As you can see, we don't add the body parameter here anymore, because API gateway will add all the parameters inside the body parameter already, and this is why we don't need to add it here. So let's execute this test. And if you scroll a little bit further down, then you will see that you get the 201 status. So it was successfully executed. And then down here, you will see successfully completed execution. So it should have worked. So let's go on to DynamoDB and check if this item has been added into the database. So we can just type DynamoDB here. Then we can click onto tables, we can click onto nodes, we can click onto explore table items. And as you can see, something went wrong. We only have the UUID in here, but we don't have the result. And that's a little bit annoying. So let's delete this quickly. We can just click it here, and then up here you have actions. Delete items, delete. And that will have deleted this item. So let's go back to our Lambda function. And look at the add node function. That's what we are executing. And we see, well, it should work, right? We have an event, we have the body. So when we create a node over the API gateway, the node will actually be passed as a string and not over a JSON object. And this is why this is not working, because when we tested before with the test function of the Lambda function, it automatically converted the string into a JSON object. So what we need to do here is we just need to comment out this and comment in this. So that's a little bit annoying, just something that you need to be aware of when you are using Lambda. So then we can deploy and go back to the API gateway. API gateway. Then we can click onto the nodes API. We can go onto this post request. Then we can click onto test again. So we can run another test. We can say node double point, this is a node passed through the API gateway. Then we can test again. Again, it will give us a status code of 201, so it successfully completed execution. So let's go back to Lambda and see what, let's go back to DynamoDB and see what happens there. DynamoDB. Tables. Then we can click onto the nodes table and explore the items. And now you can see we actually got the result back. Okay, so that means that our add node Lambda function is now accessible through our REST API endpoint. And now we will have to do the same with the fetch nodes function. So let's go back to the API gateway. Let's click onto the nodes API. Then let's click onto nodes, and here we will create another method, and this method will be get. Then here we will just click on to use Lambda proxy again, and here we will add the function fetch nodes. And then we can click save. Okay. Good, so that is done. Then let's click on to test. And here we don't need to add a body, so we can just click on to test. Oh, we got an internal server error. So let's see what the problem is here. So let me have a look at this and then get back to you. Okay, I have found the error. So let's go back to our Lambda function. Lambda. And here we have the fetch nodes function. And it was the same issue. So like we had in the add nodes function, when we pass back the body to the API gateway, then we will need to convert it from a JSON object back into a string. So here we can say JSON.stringify. And then we will put this nodes items into here and click on to deploy. So then we go back to our API gateway. Click on to nodes API. Get, test, and then we can just click test. And boom, we get the status 200. We get back all the nodes that we have added. So with this, we have successfully tested that our Lambda function is working through the API gateway. But now we need to know the URL, how we can actually get onto these nodes. And we will also need to deploy the API, because at the moment it's not deployed. So we just test it internally if everything works, but it's not deployed yet. And that's also a typical error that people do. They forget to deploy the API before they actually use it. So let's have a look how we can deploy the API. So we can click on to actions, and then we can click on to deploy API. Then here we need to define a deployment stage. We will just name this dev because it's a development stage. You could also put V1 for version 1 or something like that if you would want to create a version 2 and so on. But for me it will be dev, and then we can say deploy. Okay, now that we have deployed this, you can see it changed the page onto the stages link. And here we actually have this invoke URL, which has this /dev behind it. So now that we have this URL, we can use Postman to test if we can actually access the URL from our client. Okay, so let's copy this URL. Copy. And then let's go over to Postman. And then I will just click on to new workspace. I think I can say request. Request name will be Nodes API. And I will create a collection called Nodes API. And once I've done this, I can say save nodes API. Okay, and this will give us a new screen. Okay, so let's see first if we can get the entries. So what we will do is we will paste this URL. Then we have this extended URL called nodes. And then we will invoke this with a GET request. So let's click on to send. And as we can see, we have just retrieved all these 3 entries over the internet. So this is working. So let's try and add a node. So for this, we will use the post method on the same URL. And then here in the body, we will just go to raw. And then in here, we can type node double point, and then we can add a node. This is a node from Postman. This will be post, the same URL. We can click send. And when we go to the headers, I think, no, it's not the headers, what is, so we send something. Oh, it says here, status code 201 created. So basically it should have worked. So let's go back to the GET request. Here we can click on none again and say send. And here we have our entry that we've created through Postman. Okay, so that is basically it. So we went through the process of creating a DynamoDB table, creating an IAM role over which the Lambda functions can access DynamoDB. We have created a Lambda function to add an entry to DynamoDB. We have created a Lambda function to read entries from DynamoDB. We have set up the API gateway with 2 endpoints. One endpoint was a post endpoint to create an entry directly from the internet. And then we also have created an endpoint to read all the entries from the internet. And with this, we have completed the process. So if you would want to connect to the REST API through your application from a web server on which your application is running, then you might get an error telling you that they can't access the REST interface. That's because you will have to configure CORS so that your application from the internet is actually allowed to reach the REST API backend. This is for security reasons and is something that you will have to configure. And then you might also need to configure authentication. And I will try to cover both of this in upcoming videos. This brings us to the end of this tutorial. If this video was valuable to you, I'd appreciate if you could give it a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. If you like written tutorials, you can also visit my website 99's Cloud. The link is in the comments section below. Have a good one and see you in the next video.